Welcome back to Judgment and Decision Making. I'm Dr. Padilla. Now we're going to talk about metaphors that we kill by. And I want to start with the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, and it's this general hypothesis that suggests that the structure of language greatly influences the mode of thought and behavioral characteristics of a culture in which it is spoken. And this is just one hypothesis that illustrates how language influences our decisions and our thoughts. A really interesting illustration of this is with the Russian blues experiment. In Russian, they don't have a single word for blue. They have multiple words to talk about the color blue. And because of that, what they find is that native Russian speakers that lack a single word for blue can discriminate between light and dark blues differently than English speakers, suggesting that they have a more developed ability to identify different colors of blue. And this illustrates this concept that the language that you speak influences the ways that you think and act in the world. And if you are a multilingual individual, you might know this. There are some languages that allow you to express a concept, and you can't express that concept in another language. So when you're speaking one language, you might be able to think about things differently because you have the language to talk about that. It influences how you act in different cultures and in different situations. Language greatly influences the way we think about the world, and as a result, our actions and decisions. And I'm going to give some examples from the book that really do a good job of illustrating the impact of language. The height of the symbolic features of language is our use of metaphors. And one of the best books about metaphors is by Lakoff and Johnson, and it's Metaphors That We Live By. And there's also an accompanying text for those of you who are on poli-sci, How Liberals and Conservatives Think, which demonstrates how political power involves controlling metaphors. You can think about different politicians using terms like pro-choice, pro-life, tough on crime, bleeding heart, loyal to the fatherland or motherland. So when you're watching different political figures, think about the metaphors that they're using. For example, Donald Trump right now, in terms of coronavirus, is calling himself a wartime president. And those metaphors evoke this association with fighting an adversary that's trying to take over your land in some way. If you used a different metaphor, such as a natural disaster where there's a weather event that's coming and harming people, his actions in terms of policy decisions might be a little different. Now, for Lakoff, language is always a metaphor. Essentially, we're transferring information from one individual to another by putting ideas into words. The languages that we use are a mode of communication, and we use the individual words to transfer meaning from one person to another. Now, examples of how this can go wrong, there's many examples in the book, so I'll just highlight some of them, are in depictions of gods. So historically, Orthodox, Judaism, Protestants, and Islam currently has issues with depictions of their god. And this results in a variety of different awful events. So in 2005, there was a Danish newspaper that published cartoon images of Muhammad, and there was widespread protests. Churches were burned, protesters were killed in a variety of different countries. Similarly, in 2007, Swedish artists drew pictures of Muhammad, and that resulted in the Islamic State offering $100,000 for the execution of that individual. And you can read this ABC News article if you press pause here if you're more interested on it. On the same theme, in 2015, two gunmen attacked a Texas convention where they were having a cartoon contest for the best depiction of Muhammad. And there was a $10,000 prize for the best depiction of Muhammad. And the most recent one is in 2015. Two brothers killed 12 individuals at Charlie Hebdo, which was a newspaper, and they killed everyone in that building because of their depictions of Muhammad. Okay, other examples include how much we care about the flag. An interesting example from the book was in Gettysburg. There was a Confederate soldier which was holding the flag. He was shot. Another person picked it up. He was shot, and that kind of went on and on, each person picking it up and being shot. Eventually, the other side got the flag, one person was shot. So this is an illustration of how people are willing to lay down their life to hold up a symbol. And this isn't a literal depiction of their side. It is a symbolic metaphor of the side that they're fighting for. People are willing to lay down their lives for that symbol. Here's a tragic example where this individual was shot for wearing the wrong colored shoes. And I think gang symbology is really interesting because it has such a strong connotation for individuals. And there's this really strong in-group, out-group association with those particular types of metaphors. And finally, this is probably the strangest one, where in 2010, karaoke clubs in the Philippines, there were situations where when individuals were singing the Frank Sinatra song, My Way, there were murders associated with that, because apparently the song My Way evokes this egocentric, macho, like I want it my way, and there was fights and even killings because people selected that karaoke song and sang it badly. Okay, so all of this is to say is that we care so deeply about metaphors. We've evolved our language system to have metaphors be one of the key ways that we communicate content. But I want to point out that metaphors aren't literally what we're discussing. So this is a very famous painting, which is called The Tyranny of Images. And the quote below there is, "This is not a pipe." And what it is suggesting is that this is a painting of a pipe. It is not a pipe. Similarly, when we use metaphors, we are not evoking the actual thing, we're just referring to something. So it's kind of crazy that metaphors can have such a strong hold on us when we're just making a reference to something. We're willing to kill each other, we're willing to lay down our lives for metaphors, but we're just referencing something. It's not the actual physical thing. And one example that I thought of from my childhood was my education in the Catholic Church. I grew up Catholic. Maybe some of you might relate to this. So in Catholicism, there's the body and blood of Christ that is often referenced during the different ceremonies. And one way that this is metaphorically referenced is with the host, which is this like little wafer thing, and wine. And so there's a part in each religious ceremony where they offer up the body and blood of Christ to individuals, and they come up and they just eat the wafer and drink the blood. But over time, what has happened is the symbol for the body and blood of Christ, the wafer and wine, is now conflated with the physical thing. So rather than everyone acknowledging that, yes, this is just a symbol, it is actually taught that this is the physical body and blood and not a metaphorical association. When you eat the body and blood of Christ, it is this very sacred moment because you're supposed to be aware that you are literally ingesting that. But of course we know that that is not true. And any person, if you ask, they can say, of course I'm not like eating physical flesh. But throughout history, it's been conflated so much that you're taught that when you're educated, that is literally the same thing. And these cases are situations where when the metaphor is entirely conflated or collapsed with the meaning, that's where you have situations where people are willing to lay down their life for a metaphor because it's no longer a metaphor to them. It is the literal thing. The flag is everything good in our country. So you have to lay your life down for it, even though it's just a piece of material. Okay, summary here. Language greatly influences the way we think about the world, and as a result, our actions and decisions. The metaphors we use define our relationship with language. And finally, thus, metaphors hold great power. Think flags and depictions of gods.